My name is Rebecca Martin, and I am a Business Development Manager here at Real Story Group. So welcome to our webinar today. Before we get started, just a few quick things to highlight for those of you on the call. We will be passing along today's presentation slides for you. For the subscribers on the line, we'll be putting an archive version of today's webinar up online for your reference. And then finally, if you have any questions as we move through the presentation, as always, just feel free to type your question up in the chat window and we will be sure to address it. So today's topic is all about lessons learned. This is a big year for Real Story Group. 2016 marks our 15-year anniversary. So that's 15 years of covering content-based technologies. This is what we do, and this is what we know. We've been covering some of the vendors in this marketplace the whole time, and we've really seen their progression. We know them very, very well. So as I mentioned, today's all about lessons learned. Tony is going to try and compress all that he's learned over the past decade and a half into about 30 minutes. Tony's going to share 8 enduring lessons for enterprise customers, including how to successfully navigate technology disruption, how to weigh diverse sources of advice, and then how to become a more effective digital leader within your organization. So turning to the next slide, just a quick introduction to Real Story Group for those of you who are joining us that aren't that familiar with us. I mentioned that we cover content-based technologies, and what that means is that we are looking at 7 different marketplaces and following the products and the vendors within those 7. So if you were to bucket those into 2 larger groups, what we're focusing on is digital marketing technologies and then digital workplace technologies. And the core of everything that we do is based on our research. You know, there's a few different ways we help organizations using our research and our lessons learned. So what you see here with our first bullet is our shortlist builder tool, which is called Real Quadrant. This tool is designed to help you get to the right shortlist based on your unique use cases and strategic considerations. The next tool that we have is really a way to help you benchmark your effectiveness with your incumbent technology, and we call this tool RealScore. It's neat. It will actually assign you a numerical grade that you can use to benchmark your enterprise's capabilities, really in the context of a progressive roadmap, your progress over time, and then also you can benchmark it in relation to your peers. And then finally, the way that a good majority of our subscribers leverage our expertise is through our Plus subscription. So what you get here is access to our research. You have access to Real Quadrant, where you can generate a custom shortlist. And then you also get 4 hours of advisory time, where you can leverage the expertise of Tony or any of our other analysts. So you're essentially driving the bus, but you have Real Story Group in your back pocket. So our Plus subscriptions run $8,450 for the subscription, and then you can really use your advisory time as you see fit. So, some customers want advice on pricing and contract negotiations. Some folks just want to check their strategy. Also validating a long list or a short list of prospective vendors. And sometimes we just get asked to help review their RFPs. So just a few different ways we work with some of our customers. So finally, on the next slide, I want to highlight something that's unique in the analyst world, and we've yet to find another analyst firm that adheres to this strict independence. But we don't work for vendors, and we don't work for vendors in any capacity. We don't write white papers, we don't consult with, we don't take a cup of coffee from a vendor, and that allows us to be unbiased when evaluating where a vendor is potentially a good fit for your organization, and maybe more importantly for you as a technology buyer, where they're not such a good fit. So that's a little bit on Real Story Group. What I want to do now is turn it over to Tony. He's going to be discussing 8 lessons learned from the past 15 years, and Tony, who's our founder, is going to go ahead and take it from here. So Tony, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, it's interesting. When you have these anniversaries, you tend to reflect, and so I'm going to try to reflect on some lessons here. And I'll just invite you, if you feel like you have any lessons of your own or you want to react to anything that I say, feel free to use the questions tab in your GoToMeeting, and we'll have some time at the end, or we'll break in the middle to get your input and your feedback and your questions. And any lessons that you want to share, certainly we can use this as a place to share it. So First one is around the first lesson that we really kind of founded the company on was finding the right solution. And so historically you have these quadrants and waves and things like that put vendors in these fixed places, and but they don't necessarily tell you, okay, is this going to be the right solution for you? It's kind of a generic sort of horse race approach. And so we decided, as Rebecca mentioned, there had to be a better way to really focus on fit. And so this was really one of the first lessons that we kind of founded the company around, which is that the right tool is the one that's not generically the best tool, but it's the best fit for you, for using your own requirements around your scenarios. How do you want to weight those scenarios? And then what about strategic considerations around things like code-based modernity, the vendor roadmap, the all-important ecosystem, and how do you want to weigh these things so that you can get to your own quadrant? And so, one of the things that we've developed is this notion of dynamic quadrant building. And here's an example here where you have two different quadrants in the portal marketplace, where on the left, the customer's really focused on internal collaboration, and on the right, was more around BI and dashboards. So the first lesson here is that the best solution is the one that fits best for your unique circumstances. And so it's really been a sort of foundational thing, is to focus here on fit. So the second lesson is around marketplaces, and I get told a lot, and I've always been told, well, there might be 36 WCM vendors or 40 DAM vendors, but this marketplace is going to consolidate the way the ERP marketplace has. And the interesting thing is that almost never happens with respect to digital technology. I think that there's been so much innovation and so much activity in this space that it has been very difficult for the big vendors to really keep up. And so what's happened is you have these very dynamic marketplaces with a lot of different suppliers, to be sure, each with their own pros and cons, different delivery models, different geographic emphasis, certainly different architectures and technologies. But one thing here, if you look, for example, in the lower left, these legacy platforms from the likes of SharePoint, OpenText, Oracle, IBM, so forth, have tended to underperform both in WCM. We also see this in digital asset management. A little bit more, obviously more traction in terms of enterprise collaboration, where IBM, Microsoft are big players. But when it gets particularly to sort of digital marketing tools, we see highly fragmented marketplaces, and they're likely to remain that way for a while. And so the second lesson that we drew early on in the company, and I think is important for you to know, is that digital technology does reward innovation and new players, while old guard vendors often struggle to adapt. So what this means is that you have to sort of keep an open mind, and certainly among even some of our larger enterprise vendors, we see them actively experimenting with sometimes newer and more interesting technologies. To be sure, that's not always the way you want to go with everything. There is something to be said for maturity, but we're living in a time of innovation, and sometimes it's the older established vendors that have some difficulty keeping up with what you need. So the third lesson really gets to emerging technologies. So I talked about innovation, and now we're obviously on the cusp of a number of interesting things. And what's interesting is watching my analyst peers get really excited about this virtual reality, wearables, machine learning, certainly artificial intelligence. And there are a lot of interesting use cases emerging here. So I'm not suggesting that these are unimportant. I think what I am suggesting, though, is just because analysts and vendors tend to hype these, that doesn't mean that there's automatically this is where you should be paying your attention today. And that there's still going to be a fair bit of work, particularly leveraging these in an enterprise context. We tend to see a lot more traction initially in consumer, but then when it comes to actual enterprise technology, sometimes there are some delays. So you really need to, yes, keep an eye on what's coming down the road, but don't get caught up in the hype. And in particular, when you're looking at enterprise tools, you need to really take an employee-centered approach, right? What you saw on the previous slide was really a technology-oriented approach, kind of a technological determinism that gets pushed if all you do is listen to analysts and vendors. But what you really need to be doing for example, in a digital workplace context, is really working from your employee experience and working outward. And yeah, that may take you to IoT and artificial intelligence, but more likely it's going to take you to more workaday things that they need around better collaboration, better communication, better user experiences, more efficient business processes that can make them more effective and more recognized and have a more humane digital workplace. So rather than sort of future gazing, we'd really encourage you to focus on who are your key constituencies and working from their experience, from the glass backwards into the systems rather than from the devices forward to them. So, the key lesson here, whether you're doing digital workplace or external digital customer engagement, is that you really need to get beyond the vendor and analyst hype. And above all, apply user-generated design to everything that you're doing so that you can have solid journeys to guide your investments. And user-centered design, people may disagree on different ways of doing it, but it's a very well-known paradigm, right? It shouldn't be a mystery to anybody now. And so the real focus here is not to be looking at future technologies, but necessarily as an end in themselves, but to be really looking at your employees and your customers and designing experiences around their needs today and, yes, their needs going forward. So that's the third lesson. I think the fourth lesson is really around the scope of what a digital leader needs to know. And so what you're looking at here is a kind of a power user interface into a web content management system where they're integrating with some external analytics and things like that. And so, there are these very high-powered tools that now appeal to really power users within the platform. And so that's all well and good, but as digital leaders, it's not just that we need to know one system really, really well. What we need to do is look at a whole panoply of different tools. So this is a digital marketing reference model that we've come up with to kind of look at this from an enterprise architecture perspective. And I won't go into all the details on this. You can find webinars we've done on this. But we tend to adapt this. This is a generic reference model. And, of course, a reference model you want to adapt to your individual circumstances. So it's been very interesting applying this with different subscribers and modifying it and sort of making it relevant to them. But the point here is that if I'm in this case, a digital marketing leader, I really need to know a number of different things. I need to understand the enterprise data layer at the bottom, at least in an abstract sense, to understand, where do the different pieces come from. And then I need to also understand not just this web content management system, but also media asset management, marketing automation, social engagement, and then you have a variety of different marketing and delivery services. So, what leaders need to do is get out of the silos of an individual system and really understand how the different pieces are going to fit together so that I can create these more holistic social and mobile experiences and yes, also things like print and video. So, the lesson here is that digital leaders need to know more than one technology now and to break out of those silos, and that a savvy enterprise is going to create at least a logical architecture for how these pieces fit together, particularly in an environment where usually there's no single vendor that's going to be able to deliver all this stuff to you. So we're living in a multi-vendor, multi-technology world, both in the digital workplace and especially with respect to digital marketing. And so maybe one of the number one tasks for a digital leader is to have a mental model about how all of these things are going to get stitched together today and perhaps differently a year from now. So let's talk about the fifth lesson that we've learned, and it's around the technology and the vendors and how to evaluate the vendors and fit. So, which vendor you select really does matter. This is our famous subway map that shows where different vendors fit along different lines, each one representing a different technology or marketplace. So, for example, the light pink is digital asset management, whereas brown is ECM, and the light blue is web content and experience management. Red is enterprise collaboration and social software, and so on and so forth. And so this kind of helps you understand which vendors do what and which vendors don't do what. And, of course, you do want to focus on on the technology and it's fit for you, and that's what our Real Quadrant application helps you do. But the other key piece to this is it's not just the vendor, it's not just the stop on the subway line, it's like sort of what's around all of that stop. You know, what does the ecosystem look like? Yeah, software partners, but even more so the customer community and the service community. How vibrant is that community? How active, how accessible is it for you? To what extent does the community participate in the governance of that technology? We find that these can have a greater impact on your long-term success than necessarily the technology fit itself. And increasingly in our own research, we're starting to weight this more and more, and our tools give you the capability to also weight these sorts of things, because in the end, it does take a village to raise a piece of technology, and you don't want to be just always doing this stuff yourself. And so you need to really do due diligence on the broader ecosystem and not just the vendor and the technology. So the lesson here is, make sure that you assess, the vendor's implementation partners and customer ecosystem just as carefully as you scrub the technology. Okay, the sixth lesson is really around what is the human and organizational capacity that you need to be successful. So I've been talking a lot about the technology and the architecture and the vendors and the ecosystem. Now let's talk about you and your team. And I think we're beginning to learn that there's a lot of interesting new titles and roles that we need to bring into the organization, or we need to cross-train people. Here's some examples of a digital workplace team and potentially 6 roles that may not have even existed before, but are really critical now, particularly in a large enterprise. And you may have other roles as well. So the importance of getting the right team together and then maturing that team and putting together the right operational processes for digital is really critical. And it's unfortunate because we see a lot of digital business strategies that sort of soft pedal what internal capacity we need to actually execute on that strategy. So as Rebecca mentioned, one way to start this conversation internally and begin this analysis is to benchmark your effectiveness. How are you doing relative to the world at large and with your peers in terms of leveraging the investments you've already made in your technology, and ultimately, scoring and benchmarking yourself, which is important as a baseline, but also then beginning to get a guide and a roadmap of where you need to build up your internal capacity. And so, here's an example of an enterprise where, they may be doing, in terms of the organizational development cone, there's certain areas that they may be doing okay in terms of governance and analytics, but they really need to be working on community management, culture, and alignment, and very critically staffing and resources. So digital is, of course, about everything that happens on the screen, but it takes, perhaps ironically, it takes really strong human capacity to really be effective in digital. And we're really convinced now more than ever that the digital winners are the ones who are going to be able to build winning digital operations, to bridge departments and justify consistent support from top leadership, whether it's for digital workplace or for external digital engagement. Now let's look forward a little bit. I think that's maybe 6 lessons we've learned out of 15 years, and I've got a couple more that are possibly a little bit more forward-looking. And I'll invite you again, if you have any questions or you disagree about any of this, or you believe you have your own lesson from your own experience for digital leaders that you want to share, feel free to use the questions box in the GoToMeeting control panel, and we'll be happy to start a conversation here. So the 7th lesson really is around balance. So you saw earlier that we introduced this enterprise architecture reference model, and these sorts of models are important. You have to know what boxes and arrows are touching who. But the thing is that we believe going forward that while these are good snapshots and these are good directional guides, you need to be also flexible about how you execute on these and where you're going to make exceptions, because You can also be too rigid in terms of consolidating and saying, for example, you can only use the enterprise web content management system. You can't use any other one. And in reality, for large, diversified enterprises, sometimes they may have two WCM platforms: a light one for perishable microsites that their agencies build, and the other one for more integrated sort of e-business engagement, personalized experiences. So, the point here is that yes, you need to have a vision, you need to have an architecture, but you also need to be really flexible in the way that you execute. And in particular, once again, we'll focus on really making sure that you have user-centered design. So in terms of external digital, really putting the customer at the center and then working back from their desires for inspiration, utility, enablement, and of course value, the things that they want to do, like discover, transact, and belong, and all the different journeys that appear in blue, and then ultimately, yes, the technologies that you need to support that. And in particular, you can see the business platforms in the gray area, and certainly the enterprise services in purple. But the key thing is for real business ownership of the actual customer-facing applications in the blue, and really taking ownership of those and making sure that any architecture supports you as a business doing exactly what you need for your customers. So a successful digital strategy, especially in the MarTech world, is going to balance architectural purity with key exceptions for important business objectives or important usability objectives. And I think establishing, just even understanding that you're going to have to balance that, I think is a really important breakthrough. That you can't, on the one hand, have complete chaos. You do need an architecture, but that architecture can't be too rigid or pure, or you're not going to be able to be agile enough. Okay. So the eighth lesson that we've learned is around what we sometimes call the complexity conundrum. And this has been with us for a while and is increasingly becoming increasingly urgent, I would say, which is that on the one hand, we sometimes have complex systems and you need, as you see in the lower right, potentially more advanced search. On the other hand, Google has taught us, and many consumer experiences have taught us, that maybe a more simpler, stripped-down interface is better. And so there's this tension always between complexity and simplicity. Sometimes our business processes or our marketing goals can be very complex, but of course, from a UX perspective, you want as simple as possible. And simple is hard. Google has billions and billions of dollars investment in back-end systems that allow you to just do a simple query and have it deliver, what you need. So the question here is, how do you make these choices? Where do you go deep in terms of embracing complexity, and where do you accept kind of simple and more prepackaged? And one of the things that we look is going back, for example, to this architecture diagram and really understanding what is your core, what is your center. So in this case, it's an advocacy organization, and they reach out to millions of people, sometimes on a daily basis, by email and mobile and social channels. And so they decided that the core of their real core competency really needed to be around marketing automation. So they invested heavily in a platform there. They customized that platform. They spent a lot of time educating their people on how to use it. And it's a complex environment, their marketing automation platform. But it's also doing a lot of really powerful stuff for them, a lot of highly segmented, multiple campaigns running concurrently. And so what they accepted then was that in terms of their web content management system and their social engagement, that they would get more kind of out-of-the-box products and let the technology kind of dictate a little bit how they were going to work rather than spending a lot of time customizing them. Here's a different example with a consumer product goods where really it was their digital asset, media asset management system that was the core, and they were focusing a lot of energy on enhancing that platform and kind of embracing complexity in that environment because that was a key differentiator for them. And then focusing on simplicity in some of their other tools. So the lesson here is that enterprises shouldn't be afraid to embrace digital complexity in areas that are core to their business. And you may have to educate and train people to really uncover and leverage the power of these systems, while using more simpler, lesser featured, often software as a service technology for non-core activity. And a great example here, for example, would be with SharePoint and Office 365. SharePoint on-premise, a very complex platform. You can customize it with enough time, money, and ibuprofen to do whatever it is that you need. Whereas Office 365 now is really more of a product. You can't really customize it all that much. It's not designed necessarily to be extended, at least not natively within SharePoint, and you sort of say, okay, I'm going to do this sort of work the way Microsoft says I should, and just accept that. And so if that kind of collaboration and communication is not necessarily your core competency or what you're really trying to differentiate on, then maybe that's okay to just accept that. On the other hand, if you are trying to differentiate on your business and get competitive advantage through advanced collaboration and social communications applications, some of which we may have to customize, then maybe Office 365 isn't right for you. So those are, as Rebecca promised, 8 very quick lessons. And once again, I'll invite you in the GoToMeeting control panel to just share any questions that you have or any lessons that you think other people should we should add to this list of 8, which certainly I won't claim is exhaustive. So Rebecca, you can just, while I'm going through the questions here, maybe you can just explain to people how they can contact us for more information.
Sure. Thanks, Tony, and great lessons learned from the last 15 years for sure. So as Tony takes a quick peek at the questions, I just wanted to highlight a few things. So we definitely want to encourage you to visit our website, which is realstorygroup.com, where you can find the vendor map that you see in the background here. You can also download some samples of our research and see the vendor evaluations that we do. You can, on our website, under Tools, you can try out Real Quadrant and see how you can build a custom shortlist for yourself. You can also try out RealScore under Tools. It's one of our tools, RealScore, for free, and it'll generate your own score on your current effectiveness with your incumbent technology. So you can also, for more information on our subscriptions or to see how you can leverage the expertise of Tony or any of our other analysts, you can call us at the numbers listed here, or you can email us at engage@realstorygroup.com. So thanks again, everybody, for your time today. Tony, did I give you enough time? Do we have any questions?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to get back into this here and just show this. So we do have some questions, and waiting to see if anybody thinks that these 8 are too limiting and they want to add a number 9. So I invite anybody to add lesson number 9. But first we've got a question from Carol, who's asking, in RSG's experience, which function owns the digital transformation? Is it IS, comms, HR, operations? And so that's a really good question, particularly with respect to digital workplace, where IS, comms, HR, and operations and knowledge management, to the extent that it exists, are all really critical players. And Carol, you may not be totally thrilled with my answer, which is that I think everybody has to own digital transformation and digital experiences. That you don't want to have like one department who's sort of deputized to do it. It has to be, you have to build up digital capabilities and digital understanding and digital savvy across all of these groups, IT, comms, HR, operations. What I would like to see in the digital workplace side is sort of what's happened on the digital engagement, customer digital side, which is for HR to play a lead role, kind of like the way marketing now is playing more of a lead role on the customer side. There's a lot of reasons why that often doesn't happen, but I think HR is really critical if we're talking about the future of employee digital experience and the employee digital workplace. But clearly communications, operations play a role, but also we know that even marketing and sales teams and product teams and innovation teams also tend to get very high business value from high-functioning social collaboration environments. So there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. You don't necessarily want a single owner. You may want a lead team, and in our opinion, it's ideal that lead team internally is HR and externally is marketing, but it's always got to be a team. And there's a similar question, that Carol's asking around who owns the strategy and the roadmap. And I think that's got to be jointly created. Ideally, the lead in it, whether it's HR or marketing, is driving the strategy and the roadmap for enterprise digital, HR internally and marketing externally. But the ideally it's done collaboratively with digital specialists from across the enterprise. The other thing too that I think we have really learned is to also just kind of accept situations that are already working. So sometimes one group will just have the energy and the expertise and the resources and will take the mantle and take the leadership. And just because you're in comms, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do that. If no one in HR and no one in IS and no one in knowledge management is taking the leadership, then yeah, and you have the time and the resources and the skills in internal communications, then yeah, maybe you should take the lead. So there's nothing wrong with someone assuming the mantle if they have the expertise and filling the gap. I think historically we've had a problem that we've kind of assumed that IT would fill the gap, but sometimes they do come in and fill the gap, both with respect to external digital engagement and internal. And it's not fair for them to be in that role. These are really business problems. It should be led by business people. So Nicholas has some interesting feedback here. It's more what he's describing as a philosophical thought on the 8 lessons, which is to practice them. I think that as digital leaders, we must have a more systematic view in contrast with a linear analytic approach. And I think that's right, Nicholas. I think that another way of putting it is that we have to sort of get out of product management and look at program management. We have to get out of simple requirements gathering and look at product management and go up a level and become more strategic, really, if you're going to be a digital leader. And I think that this is one of the issues of our time, is that we have a lot of really good digital practitioners. We don't always in the enterprise have as many good digital leaders who can inspire and take a group going forward. And that's certainly one of the things that we try to do with all of our subscribers, to help give them the information and knowledge and experience and the tools to really become the experts in their group so that they can push things forward. But I think that in terms of having a more systems-oriented approach and looking beyond sort of narrow silos, that's definitely how you become a leader in any business. But I think in digital, it's increasingly important in terms of driving success as these things become, much more interdependent than they were before. So Nicholas is following up with about roles in the digital workplace, which was what kind of lesson 6, and some of these new and interesting roles, and trying to work on benchmarking your operational effectiveness. And Nicholas just pointed out that digital leadership must also be critical in the digital workplace environment and not just digital marketing. And so that you can also then provide role models for all the different departments within your enterprise. And I think that's right. I think that in a digital workplace, you have to sort of model some things first and have some test cases and really be able to show people how they can be more effective with these newer social collaboration applications. So great. Well, that takes us to the end of our half hour, in fact, a little bit over. So thanks for staying with us. As Rebecca mentioned, you will all get a copy of this deck within the next 48 hours. And those of you who are already Real Story Group subscribers, you will have on-demand access to the full recorded video. So for Tony Byrne, Rebecca, and Elena Glazer, thank you for joining Real Story Group, and look forward to catching you again. So long now.